Before we get started this morning, this evening, this afternoon, depending on where you are on this hopefully sunny Monday. All right, I think we have a critical mass now. Hello and welcome again to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Victoria Herman. I'm the Managing Director of the Arctic Institute, and I have the incredible privilege of facilitating our webinar today, which is part of a series of webinars called Breaking the Ice Ceiling, where we have an incredible now 30 speakers that will be presenting their incredible research, their lived experiences, their ideas throughout the summer. And at the end of our webinar today, I'll invite you to join our next one. For now, though, I have the incredible honor of introducing our webinar today, Creating Space for Diversity and Inclusion in the Federal Sphere. In this webinar, we are going to hear from three amazing speakers, Meredith Lavalley, Dr. Olivia Lee, and Liz Weinberg, on how interagency bodies like the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, or IRBIT, create space for diversity and inclusion in discussions and progress across the federal government. We will have a presentation, but this will be really a discussion-driven webinar. So I ask that you take out that pen and pencil or that Post-it note on your laptop and think about what you want to bring to this discussion. Any comments or questions you have. If you have questions for our speakers throughout the presentation, I ask that you type those in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation and will direct message you to ask whether you would like to come on video or audio and ask your question, or if you're in a busy household or office or not a great internet connection, and I can read that out loud for you. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to also put that in the chat or direct message me. All right, you have heard enough from me, so it is my absolute pleasure to hand over my virtual mic to our three speakers to get us started. I'm not sure which one of our three speakers would like to take my virtual mic, but I'm gonna just throw it up in the virtual air we have and someone can grab it.
Sure, I will start. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's really great to be here. I'm excited to get to speak about this topic in this context. My name is Meredith Lavalley. I'm living in Anchorage, Alaska, which is also the homelands of the Dena'ina peoples. And I am working with the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee. I've been working with them for almost 5 years now. First started as an intern and transitioned to a project analyst where I help to bring together teams of researchers around topics that IRBIT and others are have noted as priorities and get movement and discussion and new ideas on those important topics flowing and growing. So that is a little bit of who I am and what I do. I'll pass it over to Liz.
And of course, my mouse was not working very well. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Liz Weinberg. My pronouns are she and her, and I am based in unceded and traditional lands of the Chinook peoples, also known as Portland, Oregon. I'm really excited to be joining you all today. So I am the web manager and community coordinator for the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, or IRBIC, and that mostly means that I help facilitate our community space, IRBIT collaborations, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a bit, and help make the current community a little more cohesive, and then also bring new members into this space. I'm really new to the Arctic. I've been with IRBIT for now just about a year, and I come to this space with a background in science communication. I used to work for NOAA, working on marine conservation. So I feel like I am constantly learning, and I'm really excited to get to work with this community. Olivia?
Thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm Olivia Lee. I'm a research assistant professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, but I currently am based out of Prescott, Arizona. I just wanted to give a little bit more credit to what Liz and Meredith do with IRBIT. I think anyone who is in a research position knows just how hard it is to try to build collaborations and sustain some of those relationships. And I'm hoping that over the course of our discussion today, if anyone has any ideas about how to keep, Arctic research community inclusive, welcoming space, that you bring that up today. All right.
All right, the slide should be ready to go. And I think Meredith starts with you.
Okay, thank you. Great. So welcome again, everyone. Here we've got a quick snap screenshot of the IRBIT Collaboration's home space. And just wanted to point out here that IRBIT Collaborations, the web page, is a really big component of what we do and how we bring people together and how we are inclusive. And IRBIT is an interesting body because we are operating both within the federal space and also with the larger research community. So we've got kind of two sides of IRBIT to manage, and figuring out how to make both sides inclusive and transparent is challenging and something that we're working on constantly. So if you'll go to the next slide, to put it in some more context, and I know that we have people on the call who are very intimately familiar with what IRBIT does, and then some maybe who have never heard of us before. So IRBIT is an interagency body within the federal sphere, and we are tasked by Congress to coordinate different agencies that have Arctic research interests and programs, and get them speaking with each other and coordinating so they know what's going on in different agencies and also where there might be overlap. And we work really hard to bring those federal agencies together to connect them. And it's an ongoing process, always learning more and more about what happens within these really complex, big, large agencies and what they're doing in the Arctic. And then as well, from there, bringing in the larger research community and bringing them into that coordination process as well.
I think this is me. So we created this little timeline just to show the leadership within IRBIT, and mostly starting with the point of time when the IRBIT Collaborations website was put together. And I think really the broader research community didn't become sort of more of a community until the IRBIT Collaborations website came to place. So starting in 2011 with Brendan Kelly as the executive director, we've had Simon Stevenson from NSF, Martin Jeffries, and currently Larry Hinsman as the IRBIT executive directors. But throughout that period, the IRBIT executive secretary, Sarah Bowden, has really played a key role in both institutional memory and keeping that level of just continuity within IRBIT as executive director leadership rotated out. Next slide, please. Currently, though, we are really pleased to share that there are more women collaboration team leaders than men. Does this include the self-forming teams as well? Yeah, this
It
also
does, yes.
So this wasn't always the case, but currently there are actually more collaboration team leaders within IRBIT that are women than men. Next slide, please. So we wanted to highlight a few examples of how the collaboration IRBIT collaborations have been used to create posts that aren't just focused on research. So for example, Caitlin Florentine, who is was she former co-lead for the Glaciers team, sent out a post to all the Glaciers team members thinking about her consideration of all the hardships that they may be facing when the COVID-19 lockdowns really started happening. So a kind of a message of solidarity to a community, and that sort of thing kind of helps to build a community. And then does someone want to explain Nikusha's post real quick?
I can do that. So Nikush Carlo is the development director for the next Arctic Research Plan. And she has been a really fantastic leader in that space in terms of developing sort of the next roadmap for what IRBIT will be doing. But in addition, she has been really instrumental in prompting conversations about Indigenous inclusion. Nikush is Indigenous. And so the post that we included here was an article that she shared about land acknowledgement and sort of best practices and what some of the complications around that are.
Thanks, Liz. And then just a short post that I put up right after the Boulder, Colorado, and Atlanta shootings. As an Asian woman myself, I felt like maybe there was a reason to reach out to other people in the Arctic research space who may be affected by it, and also encouraging colleagues to reach out to their colleagues who may be located in these places, and giving people grace if they needed more time, for example, to meet tight deadlines, or just reaching out to them just to see how they're doing. So again, you know, while IRBIT collaborations is primarily focused on research, there's also room for you to be a person and to reach out to other people. And these are just a couple of examples of how people have used these posts to reach out to their colleagues. Next slide, please. So now we're going into kind of this background of how a diversity and inclusion working group came to be in IRBIT collaborations. And it really started with this event in 2018, this Women in Science event held in Davos, Switzerland, co-organized by Sandy Starkweather. Mostly it was a panel discussion for women across career levels from different countries, working both in the Arctic and Antarctic, to share their experiences of what it was like to be a woman in polar research, both in a leadership role, doing fieldwork. During the panel, they discussed issues like how it was very awkward being one of the pioneer women doing fieldwork when your field gear just wouldn't fit you properly. And also what it was like when you were one of the very few women seen in leadership roles, and some of the challenges and barriers faced, and you know, personal stories about how there can be issues with PIs who have egos and make it really difficult as a grad student to just navigate that whole culture of Arctic research. Unfortunately, it was a very well attended event, but there were very few women in attendance during that conference. And I don't know if, and I think the men that did show up were specifically invited by women who were the co-organizers to come. I don't know if maybe men didn't feel like they were comfortable in these spaces or welcome in these spaces. Clearly they are. They need to be a part of this conversation. But if you're interested in learning more about just personal stories of women in polar science, please go to our Instagram account at Polar Women. We continue to share just personal stories and snippets of life, of experiences of people doing research in polar regions. Next slide, please. So this little quote here was what I got back from an editor in a geoscience publication. when I tried to submit a quick meeting report from that Polar 18 event. The fact that the editor would tell me that a meeting like this was not interesting, not novel, not compelling, not worth publishing, not of interest to the scientific community, I thought was appalling. We did eventually publish a short meeting write-up in Polar Research, but feedback like this is what really got me spurred to do something, to create a space for discussions about inclusion and diversity, and even though not necessarily focused on the gender aspect of creating a welcoming Arctic research environment, I thought we need a space. And I thought, well, IRBIT Collaborations offers this opportunity to create a self-forming team. Why not take advantage of it? Next slide, please. Did you want to go to this slide?
Oh, do you want me to speak to that? Sure. Yeah, so the IRBIT Collaborations Diversity Inclusion team started out really as a space to talk about gender in Arctic science. And over the last year, sort of since I've been on board, I've seen that space transform so that it's not just speaking about gender, but also talking about race and sexuality and ability, disability, and thinking about the different ways that these different identities create barriers for people in Arctic science. And so the quote that I have up here is Kimberly Crenshaw, who came up with the term intersectionality and defines it in a recent interview as a lens or prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. And so that I think is something that the diversity inclusion working group within IARPIC is trying to take as a starting point, and to work to make sure that the work that IARPIC does and the work that the Arctic research community does is factoring in intersectionality, so that it's thinking about all parts of identities and how we can be more inclusive.
Thanks, Liz. So here are our current diversity inclusion working group team leaders. Colleen Strawhacker recently stepped down from her role, but I did ask her for a quote because she was the federal co-sponsor that was required to set up this team in IARPIC Collaborations, about why she felt it was important to create a group like this within IARPIC. And she says, "We know that investing in JEDI initiatives dramatically increases the quality of our science and policy in the Arctic. Given that there was no Arctic interagency space to discuss JEDI efforts, creating a group to bring together interested parties, identify priorities, and create communities of practice was critical to grow these efforts in the IARPIC space." So a quick quote from Colleen, and we really thank her for the work that she's contributed to our working group so far.
And I can speak to this. So this is one of the things the diversity inclusion working group has been doing, has been holding a series of discussion sections, so organized around different themes. So we've held a couple of meetings so far. So these are basically hour-long sessions where we ask folks to do a reading beforehand and then come together on Zoom, do breakout rooms where folks can discuss. So we had one on allyship and how people can be better allies within the Arctic research space. And then one on diversity and inclusion in the next Arctic research plan, which Meredith's going to talk about in a minute. And so we're still sort of planning out what the next upcoming topics will be, but a couple of things sort of on our list include talking more about co-production of knowledge with Indigenous folks and between Indigenous folks and researchers. And then also thinking about safety in field research, both in terms of actual, logistics of field research, but also how we can make sure that people who are gender nonconforming or women or Black, Indigenous, or people of color can make sure that they are feeling safe and are included within these spaces. So if there are other topics you'd like to see, we would love to hear from you on that. And another thing just to note maybe for our discussion later is that We do in many of the diversity and inclusion spaces, including in the example that Olivia gave of the Women in Arctic Science event in 2018, we definitely see a particular representation of folks. We tend to see women, we tend to see people of color. We tend not to see as many men. We tend not to see as many white men in particular. And so we're constantly thinking of how we can make these spaces inclusive to those folks, because we need everyone to be showing up. Because these are topics that you can't just have a few people working on, but really we all need to be working on how we can make things more equitable and more inclusive. So if folks have thoughts on that during our discussion period, we'd love to hear from you on that.
Thanks, Liz. So in our ongoing effort to bring in JEDI into the conversation in a sustained way, we have included equity issues into the next Arctic Research Plan, which actually the comment period, we had a public comment period that just closed last Friday. And I'll go ahead and just put that link in the chat for anyone who's interested in learning more there. This diagram is a schematic of what is in the draft plan right now. And one thing that is not included in this schematic, but is included in the introduction of this draft plan as an overarching principle, is inclusion and equity, and to ensure that everyone is welcome and treated fairly and respectfully, and promote access to tools needed to succeed. So that is included as an overarching principle for the making of this plan. And it's a new principle for IRBIT. And we fully recognize that we still have systems in place that don't integrate that principle in its entirety. And we are working to practice implementing that principle in a meaningful way. So of course, we welcome your thoughts on how we can do that. It is exciting to see that principle included in this plan. I think that that is an indication of a long-term effort to work on this together. And I also want to point out one part of the plan that is really relevant to equity issues, and that is the foundational activity. And you can see it in the bottom left part of your screen, maybe if you have glasses that are strong enough. And that is the co-production of knowledge and Indigenous-led research. Thank you. Foundational activity. And a foundational activity in this plan, it's a new part of how we're trying to integrate different pieces of the Arctic research community and priorities. And a foundational activity is meant to be integrated throughout the entire research priorities. So the priorities are in red, and the idea is that each of the foundational activities, including co-production of knowledge and Indigenous-led research, are foundational to those priority areas to be included. So that's really exciting to have that challenge to integrate co-production of knowledge and Indigenous-led research. And I highly recommend going into the plan and reading some more about that, but I will briefly describe a couple of pieces of that plan. And I know John Pierce is on the call here, and he was working on this section of the draft plan. So maybe he can come on at some point during this discussion and offer some more insight. But for now, some major pieces of that are to enable communication and coordination. So that means both working with researchers to make them aware of existing Indigenous organizations and advisory committees, co-management councils, that kind of thing, to make those connections for researchers, and also to advance new venues where federal research activities can be informed by Indigenous knowledge and the needs of Indigenous communities. Also recognizing that sustaining engagement and building trust over the long term is really important for successful partnerships. Also to put the IRBIT principles for conducting research in the Arctic into practice. And I will put that link here in the chat as well. And these principles were created to educate and promote building trust, effective communication, respecting Indigenous peoples and cultures of the Arctic, and we would like to see them implemented further. So that is part of this draft plan as well. And then finally, increasing capacity within Arctic communities for Indigenous-led research. And so that's looking for funding opportunities, promoting actions that identify ways that federal structures can be adapted or changed for greater inclusion of Indigenous voices and to support Indigenous-led research. So that is all really exciting. We have quite a bit of work to do to live up to some of those goals that we've identified. And I will certainly make many mistakes along the way, but stepping forward, stepping out and making that, move into space that is needed is a good thing, even if it might not be perfect, might be a little messy. And I think
Meredith. Yeah, so I'm going to talk just about two more initiatives we're working on within the IRBIT collaboration space, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So one thing I want to highlight is our code of conduct. So the original and current IRBIT code of conduct is really short and was pretty focused on just intellectual property. It included a line that members agree to honor the IRBIT policy of creating a safe and respectful discussion space, but didn't include anything about how we could do that or how the community could help foster safe and respectful space. Beyond, the only specificity was you can't use content shared in our community outside of it with the author's written permission. That's important, but it also is it was very short. There was also no reporting process. So I came on board with IRBIT last June amidst calls for greater racial equity in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And so IRBIT began planning ways we could make our community more equitable and inclusive. And so one of the things we focused on was our code of conduct. And it may not seem like a big deal, right? It's who actually reads codes of conduct. They kind of get posted on a website, and I think people often forget them. But they also do set a tone for a community. And when they're done right, they do provide avenues for increasing equity and inclusion and help create an accountability process if there is a reporting process. So creating this code of conduct has taken a surprisingly long time. So first off, I started out researching what other similar organizations had in place. And then we had a draft almost ready to go when the last administration issued Executive Order 13950 on combating race and sex stereotyping, which barred agencies, federal contractors, and recipients of federal grants from conducting any sort of diversity inclusion training, which we were pretty sure was going to somehow touch on our code of conduct, or at least training our code of conduct committee. So that threw a little bit of a wrench in the process. However, we were able to post the draft for community review on January 25th. And we got some really great feedback from the community. So what you're seeing on the screen here was the post that I put up saying, hey, we have this draft. We'd really love your input. So we got really good feedback from the community. We got some volunteers for our new code of conduct review committee. And then we went to revise it, which has also taken a surprisingly long time because when you have federal government, you've got questions about liability and just sort of the general processes for enforcing a code of conduct. And also then we had questions, since we have folks on our code of conduct committee who are also staff at universities, we had to sort of untangle some of the questions around mandatory reporting in Title IX. But I'm really excited because I think this week, fingers crossed, we're going to have the new code of conduct up. I'm just waiting on a couple of updates to our website to make it possible. So, that's going to happen. It's finally here. And I'm really excited about it because it is much more comprehensive. It's a multi-page document but it explicitly calls out the expected behavior of the community. So what we're looking for people to be, how people should act to make an inclusive space. And it also explicitly calls out unwelcome behavior. So things that we don't want to see in this community. In addition to that, there is a clear reporting process. And we have that committee set up that will review any reports that come in. And that committee includes folks from IRBIT, from NSF, since they're our funders, from ARCIS, the Arctic Research Consortium of the US, which is sort of our partner organization, as well as folks from the IRBIT collaborations community. So I'm very excited about this, as you can probably tell, because I'm talking too fast. But keep an eye out on the IRBIT collaborations website. We should be seeing a new code of conduct hopefully this week. And the other thing that I'm really, really excited about is our mentorship program. So I am gonna try and drop that link in the chat. It's right here. I see a couple of folks in the participant list who are part of this mentorship program. So I'm really excited to see you all. And so one of the other initiatives we wanted to create, to begin to create a more equitable and inclusive space, was a mentorship program. So IRBIT is pretty unique in that we bring together people from lots of different career paths. We have folks from federal agencies, we have folks from academia, we have folks from nonprofits, sort of all different walks of life in terms of how people came to Arctic research and what exactly they're doing in that space. So we're currently in the first 6-month pilot of this mentorship program. We've got about 100 participants. And the way it works is that we've got a series of mentoring circles with 4 to 6 people per group. And those groups include folks from a variety of levels and career paths, although they are generally organized by sort of research interest or field. And the reason we did mentoring circles is that sometimes pairs just don't work out well. If you don't click with someone, it can feel like you've just sunk 6 months into trying to build a relationship with someone you just don't really get along with. And also creating circles that meet regularly means that people are empowered to mentor each other regardless of their career level. So early career folks are empowered to mentor each other. Early career folks can teach established career folks things. Established career folks can mentor early career folks, and you have sort of multi-directional mentorship rather than sort of a unidirectional flow of information and power. And so these groups meet monthly to discuss prompts or whatever else they're interested in. And we're going to be running this pilot session through August, at which point we're going to stop, evaluate, and then set it up again for the fall and winter. And so since this, for me, the mentorship program has kind of gone into a black box. I have helped set up the groups and I send out prompts for the monthly discussions, but I'm not really in the mentorship program. I'm really excited to see what the evaluations say. I already know some changes that we'll make to the program. For example, pairing people in similar time zones so that people aren't trying to coordinate meetings from Alaska all the way to, I think in some cases, Europe and China. So trying to make that a little bit easier. But I'm excited to see what other changes we might make. And I also just want to recognize that this form of sort of short-term mentorship doesn't work for everyone. So we've gotten some feedback from folks in Indigenous communities that this isn't an ideal format for them. So just sort of continuing to think how we can improve this program so that it is a truly welcoming and inclusive space. So those are a few things that IRBIT is doing, some things we've been trying to establish, but there's always room for more. And so we'd really love to hear feedback from you in terms of things that might be helpful or any other questions you might have about IRBIT and IRBIT collaborations. So I'll stop sharing my screen for now so that we can open things up a little more.
Thank you so much. And as we move into our question and answer, I just want to invite everyone to join me in giving a huge virtual round of applause. I know you three probably can't hear how thunderous it is across continents, but I can assure you there is lots of applause happening all across our Zoom. Thank you so much for such a great presentation and covering so much and bringing us through the history of how IRBIT is where it is today. I found that really useful, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So as a reminder, we are now moving into our question and answer section and our discussion. So if you have a question or a comment, you could either move down to the participants icon and click raise hand around your name, or you can go to the chat and just type in what your question is. I am going to bring Thomas Kim, who has his hand up to ask the first question. He was applauding. He was just so excited that he was continuously applauding. So again, if you have questions, you could raise your hand or put them in the question and answer chat that we have in the bottom right of your screen. But up, we have a first question from Catherine, who I'll ask to come on and ask herself.
Hi, I'm Catherine Scheck-Snyder, coming to you from New Hampshire, USA. So I'm Eastern Daylight Time, and thank you, Liz, Olivia, and Meredith for a wonderful presentation. I've had the opportunity to work with mostly Liz and Meredith for several months now in my journey with IRBIT, and it's been wonderful. And I've seen Olivia, seen you a few times, so getting to know you. My comment is really touches on the last thing that Liz talked about with the mentorship programs and having a circle of 4 to 6 people at different waypoints in their journey and work in the Arctic, and just getting together and talking about those. And I'm on one of those circles, and we immediately kind of synced, and we have a very comfortable conversation. And it is really quite different from my, several decades of experience working in the federal space in the U.S. Navy. I'm a just last year retired U.S. Navy physician, and have had lots of work with civilians in the government as well as military. The mentoring circles to me ask, who are you and what do you bring to the table? And I think both of those are very important. I think here we're talking quite a bit about just, who are you as a person, what's your identity? But a whole lot of it is what do we bring to the table in the Arctic space to make it a better place? And we bring a lot of things to the table, not just my identity as a middle-aged white woman, but I have skills that I bring to the table. The federal government, as I'm sure all of you know, likes hierarchy. And when you say, what's your organization about, the first thing people do is they bring out an org chart. And, the things that are important there are, what is your role in that hierarchy? And whom do you report to? You're in a box, you should be doing your job in the box, and there is a person above you that keeps their eye on you and people below you. And that's really quite different. And so for people to kind of, get their heads around a diverse population of people and, sort of understanding who these people are, I think I've come to appreciate that a lot of people have spent their entire life in a hierarchy box, and it may well be the same in academia, and they feel real safe there. And when someone comes in and they are expressing their identity more than what these folks are used to, it can be disarming. I think, the answer is, well, gang, you got to get used to it because that's the way we're going. But I've come to appreciate that can be disarming, and that as we, continue to emphasize what we bring to the table, which is plenty, that sometimes can help smooth the acceptance process. So thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's like I said, the mentorship program is both something I'm deeply involved in and also something that's a little bit of a mystery to me as it's running. So it's really great to hear that feedback.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's a real testament to the work that you three and your team are doing. We have another question from Mark, who I'm going to call up so he can ask the next question.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Olivia, Meredith, and Liz, for a great presentation. And thanks for just calling out explicitly the lack of people who look like me, I suppose, who are involved in these things. I'm really grateful that you're not, dancing around that topic, but you're just being explicit in saying it. So that's terrific. I have a question, I guess, and I wrestle with this a little bit myself about, you asked about how to get more people involved and more diverse people, so that BIPOC faculty and people of color, women, trans, other genders are not carrying all the burden for this. And I wonder sometimes if it's because we separate the issues into, there's a workplace type issue, and then there's a science or a research type issue. And so without integrating them as much as we should, and so we'll talk about a leaky pipeline, or we'll talk about we need more BIPOC faculty, or we need to treat people better in field work or in the workplace. And those become workplace type issues. I don't mean to belittle them. I'm talking about general perspectives, because I see them as deeply integrated with the research questions, the results. The experience in the field is not just about how people are treated, it seems to me, but also about what kind of result can come from that. And so I wonder if that's true, and if you see ways. I know you're talking all about these things, so I'm just reiterating the points you've already made about the integration of everything, but I'm wondering if there's explicit ways you found of communicating that to people to make sure that they understand this isn't just tangential. We have to actually integrate this into our research processes and results and papers and everything. Sorry if that's confusing.
That's great, Mark. Thank you for bringing that up and for showing up and being brave to show up and ask these questions. We struggle with that. We don't have any answers. I think it's absolutely right. Sometimes finding the right representative, like Martin Jeffries was at one point a co-lead for the diversity and inclusion team. And it takes someone that looks like you, Mark, to show up for, I think, others to go, well, okay, this is still relevant to work. This is going to make my research better. This is going to help me build a better team. This is going to expose me to new ideas for a research direction that maybe I hadn't thought of. But until we change the culture of, gee, I have to keep this professional environment, and if this is not directly going to relate to my work or how I'm going to benefit from my work, I think it's always going to be a bit more of a struggle to bring in people who want to just focus on the research aspect of it. I think it's going to take people like you showing up to help to change that culture. I'll give an example too. I collaborate with some researchers in Europe, and they're very open about, hey, I have this family issue that I'm going to need to step back from. And for me, at one point I was like, I have to keep work, everything professional. But seeing a colleague in Europe, a white man from Europe, say, I'm bringing in my personal life to this work email thread so that you understand my perspective of why I'm going to have to step back from my work for a while, made me think, well, okay, I guess it's all right to open these doors, to have these conversations about, I am more than a researcher. My personal life affects my work. I'm going to open that door to help my colleagues understand where I'm coming from, and that makes them more understanding. So I think the more men that bring their personal life into some of these conversations, the better it opens the, because it's very hard for women to feel comfortable that this is okay in this group. I don't know if they're going to start looking down on me or not take me as a professional or think I'm just trying to spend time with my kid all the time. So if men would do that, would open those conversations, normalize that, it really helps minorities, women, other people in marginalized groups feel like, okay, I don't have to feel like I always have to put up this professional front.
Can I add to that too?
Sure.
I think, Olivia, I think those are all fantastic points. I think the same goes for anyone who is sort of in a more privileged position. So like I have my pronouns up there. I'm a cis woman, but my partner is non-binary. And so when I'm showing up in spaces and saying, hey, here are my pronouns, I'm making it easier for people who are trans or non-binary to also be sharing their pronouns. And so I think I love that IRBIT has a diversity inclusion working group. I want it to keep going and thriving, but I also want to make sure that it is not the only space in which these conversations happen. So making sure that we're setting up collaborations between this team and others. And I think it's on all of us when we are in the research and science space to constantly be reminding ourselves that we can see things through a lens of equity and inclusion. So how can I make my fieldwork space more equitable and inclusive? How can I make this, is this research project equitable and inclusive? Rather than having it be sort of something that we only think about when we're in a webinar about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but having it be one of those, sort of checklist questions that you are constantly returning to, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think that the diversity and inclusion team has done a good job of starting that, kind of because they have gone into the different disciplinary collaboration teams, the permafrost team, the glaciers team, terrestrial ecosystems, those spaces, and said, here we are, we would like to be more integrated. How can our team work with you all to bring up these topics on a regular basis?
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. We have time for a few more questions. We have 2 more I see, but if anyone else has any other questions, please type them in the chat. I'm going to ask Swati, do you want to come on and ask your question next?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Firstly, thanks a lot for making me part of this prestigious meeting. And firstly, greetings to all from India side. My question is related to collaborating with this organization. Is it possible, like I recently completed my doctorate and I have joined somewhere as a postdoctoral position. So is it possible with that I can be the part of this organization to contribute something in the Arctic region, or like whatever I can give? Is it possible with the two positions, or I have to quit one and only for one side I can be the part of it?
Yeah, I think maybe for all of our speakers, this is a good opportunity to talk about IARPIC maybe for a global audience. We have many non-US based participants, and I'm sure many more are going to watch the recording. So maybe speak a bit about, this strange, it is an interagency working group, but speaking of diversity and inclusion, does that expand beyond, continents, or if anyone wants to speak about that?
Meredith, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
I can start. IARPIC does have a very heavy emphasis in a lot of ways on US priorities and policies, but our larger community is very international and is much stronger for those international connections. So we really welcome people with outside of the US to participate. I think every time we have a meeting where there is someone coming in from outside of the US, it brings potential for other collaborations, other perspectives, and is very, very helpful. And as well, we have had a good space to bring in international collaborations into both the current Arctic Research Plan and then the next Arctic Research Plan. And so we really welcome you to join and participate fully as who you are.
Yeah, and I can just add to that, you know, while the Arctic Research Plan is a US plan, many Arctic issues are circumpolar. So, you know, it doesn't make sense just to focus on the US, and a lot of folks around the world are working on these issues, and we love to see those international collaborations. So in the chat, I just put the link to request an account to IRBIT collaborations. We ask you to say how you can help. We just want to make sure you're not a robot. So if you are working in the Arctic research space in any way, we want to see you on this site. So yes, please join us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'll also include all of the links that have been shared in the chat in my follow-up email to everyone. So if you think you've missed something, I will make sure everyone gets that. We have a final question from Joanna, who first wants to thank you all for great presentations, and says that they are drawn, as always, to this question of how to bring in those community members who are notably absent from Jedi-focused meetings or conversations. They want to know, how do we do it? And maybe this is a good final question. Looking at our webinar, we have an amazing group of 19 participants, 25 a bit earlier, but there are many, many more who weren't here. So how do we invite all of those people to our next conversation?
Yeah, no good answer for that. I think this, you're not always going to be able to reach every group all the time. Reaching out personally always tends to get better attendance than just passively putting out information and expecting people to show up. But I don't know, Liz and Meredith, any other ideas?
Well, I appreciated Mark pointing out that it's good to point out that there are not many white men here, although that might not be the case for this meeting as much, but maybe that's something that it could be not a call out in a mean way or a way to turn people off, but trying to frame it in a way that would invite people specifically. Because I think that many men who are tangentially part of this conversation or have heard about it just feel like it's not a space that they have anything to add. Potentially, maybe they think give space for other voices to come out of, and I don't want to participate and make it about me or command the conversation. And so I think pointing that out to people regularly and creating that space explicitly might be a good way to do it.
Yeah, Meredith, that made me think, I think a lot of us, particularly in the science world, are conditioned to feel like we always have to be contributing and sharing. And so if you are maybe someone who doesn't feel like you have a place in the conversation where you don't want to be, you don't have information to share, maybe you don't feel that it's a space for you. And I feel like my journey around equity and inclusion issues has been learning frankly that it's not about me. And learning to step back and that I'm in this space to learn and let other folks really lead the charge and share their stories. And so I think if we can emphasize that that these spaces are spaces for learning as much as they are for sharing, I think that may help as well. And Victoria, in the last minute here, can I just share my screen just one more time just to put our contact info up?
Absolutely.
Great. So yeah, we wanted to just make sure that everyone has our contact info and also just sort of to throw out there what we feel like we can be resources for, because I think something that's really important in these spaces is for us to serve as resources for one another. So for example, I don't have a background in Arctic science, so please don't ask me really specific questions about Arctic science. But if you want to talk about science communication and writing, or how to communicate, how to coordinate communities of scientists, I'm here for you. Also happy to talk about queer issues and inclusion. And also I have some experience with contracts and negotiating them. So happy to serve as a resource for any of those things.
And I have been 5 years now in this Arctic research space. So I have a building and have a good amount of knowledge of what different programs are out there and how they connect. So I'm happy to help anyone who's new to Arctic research or trying to figure out how to navigate who's doing what. Happy to try to help with that. Also, I live in Alaska, so would love to connect people to resources here, including just things to do and travel advice.
Mine's there on the screen. Being an immigrant coming from Malaysia and juggling a career in academia especially, and with a little 5-year-old. So thanks, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I am so happy to have seen so many people from all around the world. If we can give one more huge virtual round of applause, Liz, Olivia, Meredith, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your expertise and experiences. I know I am not the only one that had an amazing time and learned so much. So thank you. And for everyone on our webinar, we hope to see you at some upcoming Breaking the Ice Ceiling webinars over the summer, where we'll be talking about curriculum development and experiential learning in Arctic sciences, art history in the Arctic, and inclusivity and exclusivity in landscape representation. And in the fall for many more webinars. Again,